taking content that users are putting through their platforms or through their systems to improve the system as a whole. And that's where you have to have this discussion of, okay, am I okay for my data being used for that purpose? And most of the time the answer is going to be yes, because it's the benefit of everyone.
Yeah.
Even right now, if somebody's listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast, they just released that they are going to start allowing transcripts for their podcast. That is machine generated.
So that's true, and that's something else they wanted to get to. But the like, to go back to the analogy that the audience member was talking about, like, so he went to a museum and looked at a bunch of stuff.
Theoretically, I can't say if he did or not.
That's the story that we're going with, at least right here. But the thing that he's not qualifying is that somebody had to build the access for him to be able to go in and do that, and then permit him to be able to go do that.
And curate that data set.
Yeah, and so the internet works the same way. It's like the internet. If I build a website and put something behind a paywall, that's the same thing as a museum. And so is somebody going to go into, because we can't say we're doing some of this physical and then I'm going to take it and change it mentally. It's like, since we're just physical, he's not going to walk out with those pictures to then have one right here so he can make a facsimile or something like that. He's just going to look at it, and he's going to take that impression home with him, and then the impression is what stays. And
but he can take a picture. He can use his phone and take a picture.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. That's a rule that the museum gets to apply.
And even if he took a picture, he would probably arguably still be violating copyright law.
Ooh, good point.
It depends, yeah. Depends.
But like a YouTube, they can have similar rules. It's like, you can view this stuff, but you can't take it with you. Like, and that's completely fine. And I think that needs to be extended down to the person as well. It's like, you can look at my stuff, but it's mine. And like, there's a guy on the internet now that I love pixel art, and he's a pixel artist, and he's committed himself to one image a day, and so far he's 100%, and that should be his, and in no way anybody else's unless he says otherwise.
Which is why NFTs came into play for a while.
Well, yeah, right? That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, let's not go there. Which I'd like to know what that website is and put that in our show. I think pixel art. Anybody that had a system way back in the day when it was 8-bit, you dig that kind of stuff.
But if somebody scrapes that, I think that's stealing. And I want GenAI to move as quickly as possible, but I also want to keep people's creativity for them. I want people to be able to keep their creativity to themselves if they want to.
Yeah, it's so hard. I feel like I've always been in this dilemma of privacy versus availability. Going back to the days when I would teach security in the IT space, and I've always been conflicted. So it's always hard. I'll say something today, like honestly, Franklin, you convinced me I'm wrong, right? This idea that machines are not human, I need to think about that more when I'm thinking of some of the cases or dilemmas that I'm going through. I think that is something that is hard to not do. I mean, we want to put a face on the models, right?
Try and say the word.
What word?
Anthropomorphization.
Yeah, I don't even know how to say it, so I'll let you do it. Did you look it up?
That's it, but it sounded, it's hard to say fluently.
Yes.
There's just some words. I had a really hard time growing up ever saying the word funeral. I could only say funeral.
Fernal. Yeah.
It took me a long time, and I need to practice.
Yeah. Well, speaking of you, Franklin, and Charlie, I'm going to throw this at both of you. Let's talk responsible AI, responsible data at the personal level. What are some of your do's and don'ts? You're not as a lawyer, not as a CEO of a company. You personally, what are some do's and don'ts that you feel? So I already feel I like the one about if it's my personal website, my personal domain, and I want it to not be scraped, I should have that right. So I got that from you, Charlie.
Well, it's not just anything I build, like a personal. Like company-wise, like I put it, if I start a business, I can lock the front door.
Yeah. But what if you put it on somebody's platform, like a YouTube? Do you does that change?
I think it transfers liability to the platform because you're entering into an active partnership where you've signed EULAs, you've got an agreement going with them.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
it's very favorable to the platform, though.
that's
very,
true, but
very
you
favorable.
agreed to it.
Yes.
And yes, and they'll monetize, but they'll change that anytime they feel like it.
And they frequently do. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel there's any do's and don'ts when it comes to making decisions with data or not, or storing of data? Anything that you feel is good for our audience?
Yeah. So one thing I'd close the loop on with the discussion we were just having is it's easy to talk about this in the context of creative works with outputs that are synthetic media of some kind.
Yeah.
And if you look up synthetic content and the initiatives that are happening around trying to have content authenticity, Adobe is a big player there, Microsoft's a big player there, a lot of big players in that space now. I kind of take a step back because that is one aspect of the work that I do. But the other aspect is working with developers that are developing these tools. And again, the reason why, like with the model cards, I prefer calling things what's the underlying, what are the pre-existing materials, what are the training materials, what are this training data, but in reality, I like to refer to it as training materials, because just as much as the outputs could be infringing if you're using an image generator, or could potentially you can prompt it in a way that you can use the name of a well-known person that has been photographed millions of times and have that drive how you control the look of a character in your comic book, which is what Chris Castanova did. They did that for their book, that their graphic novel that they tried to register with the Copyright Office. Look up that, the prompts that were used there. I look at this outside of the creative space, and I also look at it in just everyday kind of products and services that are being developed. What does it mean to be collecting personal data? What does it mean to be collecting personal information, sensitive information about people? And then how you're using that. And if you're using a model that is going to be a continuously learning model, or if it's going to be a static model that won't learn, those would be some decisions to make. And maybe you're choosing to not use raw data. Instead, you're going to create a synthetic variation of that to where it's not identifiable anymore. It removes those identifiers, things like that. That's where responsible data really comes into play from my perspective at a professional level and at an advising level, is to understand that, like, even just I try not to get bogged down in the headlines because that's just going to stifle innovation and development. But like the ability that people can pull out and extract phone numbers, social security numbers, addresses, all that kind of stuff, real information about people because the model that was used, I don't want to use names because I don't want to be disparaging, but a model that was used and just trained on the vast amount of information on the internet, that's a risk. And so those are the types of things that you got to think through. And so that's one of the things that doesn't keep me up at night, but also is just one of the things I always try to drive home is understanding the training materials that you're using and how that will inform the decisions you make on the architecture side and on the development side as well. But in my personal life, I personally choose to use Apple. And I love being able to understand the lockdown nature of where my data goes. So like I use Apple Fitness Plus, I get all the prompts, and I understand that by using a workout that is doing benchmarking against other people that have done the workout before me, and my data is contributing to that, and I'm fine with that. Like to me, I think Apple has a great framework for identifying how to disclose what's being done, and no surprises, and also capturing those consents pretty much almost every time, or if you ever update your phone, stuff like that. So I'm a big fanboy in that sense, and I think Microsoft has done a great job too of doing similar initiatives of making sure that it's clear of where data is going and where it's not going, how it's being used and how it's not being used. And even more so in support of that, Microsoft a couple years back launched their Open Data Initiative. And I thought that was a great resource to go look at. If you look at the landing page for that, they actually have a couple of on the legal side, a couple of licensing agreements that can be used that identify, kind of like I was talking about earlier, open source licensing. There's open data licenses. And Microsoft has like 4 or 5 good examples, some for research, some not. And so it's just those are the kind of things that I like to look at and dive into and reverse engineer if I can to kind of understand and think through what's going on.
Gotcha.